to temporarily withdraw from his studies at the University of Maryland. Jane would continue her schooling, leading to an even more hectic schedule than Jim's. They were now having to perform Sam and Friends live twice a night, and make appearances on other shows. The hard work was paying off. Sam and Friends was getting better, with the duo improving the puppetry, gags, effects, and scenarios. Their audience loved all of it, but WRC seemed indifferent to the show's success. During yet another programming change, Sam and Friends' first evening appearance was cut, angering fans once again. And same as before, WRC listened to their frustrated audience, returning the 6:50 time slot to the show. The time slot would prove even better after NBC moved its soon-to-be-popular newscast Huntley Brinkley to 6:45, and WRC placing Sam and Friends right before it. This meant Sam and Friends was the lead into the two most popular shows on the channel. Jane exclaimed, quote, "I mean, what could be better? You have national news, international news, weather, sports, and Kermit." Between the new programming and their appearance on The Tonight Show, the Muppets were on their way to stardom. The sheer amount of content that Jim and Jane were outputting was impressive. Even more incredible was its quality. Jim quickly developed a sort of perfectionist nature, while his time to develop and rehearse was limited, and there was only so much he could do before they went on the air. His creative eye was sharpening, and the little tweaks and nitpicks that he had were helping produce something extraordinary. He was beginning to come around on puppetry as an art. In the summer of 1957, Jim and Jane were approached by the John H. Wilkins Company to create a series of short commercials promoting Wilkins coffee. Jim agreed, but if Wilkins was expecting anything short of absolute Muppet madness, they were in for quite the surprise.
"We're here to persuade people to drink more Wilkins coffee."
"What's the club for?"
"To get their attention." "Do you have any Wilkins coffee in your house?"
"No."
"You know, a house isn't a home without Wilkins coffee."
The 10-second adverts featured two new characters, Wilkins, a Muppet that loved Wilkins coffee, and Wontkins, a Muppet that hated it. Wilkins would constantly punish Wontkins for not drinking the coffee, sometimes threatening the audience as well. Both would be voiced by Jim, in what would be his first consistent vocal roles, as Sam and Friends still heavily relied on lip-syncing. The short ads were funny and violent, and they were more successful than Wilkins or Jim could have imagined. The advertisements became sort of a national phenomenon, further placing the Muppets into the national cultural conscience. Wilkins Coffee would even merchandise the advertisements with two hand puppets of Wilkins and Wontkins, which would be a huge hit. In 1958, Sam and Friends would win the Emmy for Best Local Entertainment Program. There seemed to be no limit to the Muppets' potential, but Jim was unfazed. Although he was making a healthy living, especially for his age, he considered himself to be an artist first and a puppeteer second, and his allegiance was not to puppetry, but to the audience that loved his work. He was finally able to shake this mindset once and for all after a trip to Europe exposed him to the art and diversity of puppetry. Of this experience, he said, quote, "It was at that point that I realized that puppetry was an art form, a valid way to do really interesting things. I came back from that trip all fired up to do wonderful puppetry." During this trip, he had grown a full beard, which he would keep, and would become another aspect of his unique look. He returned to performing on Sam and Friends. A college friend of Jim, Bob Payne, had assisted in Jim's absence. Jim's trip had taken his abundant creative energy and focused it, and he had a few things he needed to do in order to become the creator he knew he could be. In 1959, he would resume his classes at the University of Maryland, and more notably, Jim Henson would begin to date Jane Nebel. The two had actually both been engaged, Jim to a teaching student named Anne Marie Hood, and Jane to a man named Bill Schmidtman. Despite this, their close proximity and performing relationship was so strong that it seemed only a matter of time before the two were to get together. They both broke off their relationships and began dating. The newly formed Muppets Inc., in which Jim owned 60% and Jane 40%, would be the foundation for their relationship. Jane would recall that the relationship was less based in romantic passion than it was in the passion for the work, and the admiration and respect the two had for each other and their talents. The two would be married on May 28, 1959, taking a short break from Sam and Friends to go on their honeymoon. When they returned, Jim's passion for puppetry and the show was stronger than ever. The Wilkins ads had instilled confidence in his ability to create sketches without a track, and he began testing out different voices for his Sam and Friends characters, giving Kermit what seemed to be his favorite Muppet, the voice that was closest to his own, a soft-spoken, throat-heavy, nasally voice that would become both Kermit and Jim's trademark sound.
"Yes, indeed, but let's not be quite so formal. Why don't you just call me Kermit, and I'll call you, well, what would you like me to call you?"
"Chet Huntley."
"Oh, okay, Chet Huntley."
These original sketches were created by Jim producing a 4.5-minute soundtrack of the dialogue and music that he and Jane would then perform to. Jim also began to experiment with animation. He always enjoyed drawing his Muppet creations before building them, and much of Sam and Friends' promotional material were images he had drawn himself. Animation, a natural next step for the ambitious creator, would become a personal passion of his. The new aspects of the show resulted in some of the most impressive and memorable episodes of Sam and Friends.
Man, you're just a beginner. I'm an old hand at this stuff. Watch.
Hey, a real watch.
With moving parts, no less.
Gee, have you taken this course already?
No, man, I'm a natural. Been doing it for years.
In May of 1960, Jim finally graduated from the University of Maryland. In the time he resumed his college education and completed it, he had married Jane, and she had given birth to their first child, a girl named Lisa Marie Henson. Just weeks after her birth, Lisa was already engulfed in the hectic life of the Muppets. That summer, Jim, Jane, and Lisa traveled to the 1960 Puppeteers of America convention. Jim went to the convention to see the works of and network with the famous puppeteers of the time. Here, he would meet television puppeteer Bert Tillstrom, who was well known for his program, Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, a show in which an ensemble of puppets acted as members of a theater troupe trying to put on a show. Tillstrom would introduce Jim to a few of his acquaintances, including his puppet builder, a man named Don Saleen, and a young agent named Bernie Brillstein. Brillstein was uninterested in taking another puppeteer on as a client, but Tillstrom urged him to give Jim a chance. Brillstein invited Jim to a meeting in his New York office, describing that the first time he saw the puppeteer, he looked to be, quote, a cross between Abe Lincoln and Jesus. Jim brought in a box of Muppets and performed a few skits for the agent. Brillstein was blown away, signing him on as a client without further hesitation. The next year, Jane became pregnant with her second child. Jim and Jane began discussing the possibility that Jane would have to stop performing, and the two started to look for new talent. They did so by traveling once again to the Puppeteers of America convention, this time hoping to find someone to hire. The couple ran into a 21-year-old puppeteer named Jerome Jewell, a smart, witty performer that was already a fan of the Hensons. Jim would sign him on as the first employee of Muppets, Inc. Another potential candidate was the 17-year-old son of notable performers, Mike and Frances Osnowitz. The shy young boy was a gifted performer, but like Jim before him, he had little interest in making puppetry a career. Jim was determined to stay in touch with him, and hopefully after he graduated, Jim could hire Frank Oz to be a full-time performer with Muppets, Inc. Jewel began work on Sam and Friends, taking over Jane's position. He proved himself to be a competent puppeteer and an incredible writer. Sam and Friends was at the height of its popularity throughout 1961. However, Jim was ready to move on from the show, to experiment with the art form and push the boundaries of puppetry. Jim would write the following in his often succinct journal, quote, Sam and Friends, last show, December 15th, 1961. The end of the final show saw the entire set exploding around the cast, a fitting finale. Sam and Friends characters would continue to be used by Jim and Jerry in various live and televised performances over the next few years. Some would evolve into some of today's recognizable Muppets, and Kermit would remain on Jim's arm as he took Muppets, Inc. on its next adventure. Sam and Friends would be missed by its fans in the D.C. area, but they had a feeling that this wouldn't be the last they would see of Jim Henson.
I'm going to explain about Muppet's meteoric rise in fame in both the world of entertainment and the field of commercials.
Okay, just so you don't tell them the truth.
I'm sure. I sincerely hope you'll feature my birthday party tomorrow, Minstrel.
It would be a pleasure, Your Loveliness.
Well, I tried.
Hey, you know what a puppet is. You're a puppet. This is Don Saleen, who is our Muppet builder. Frank has the right hand, and you have the left. And who's operating the head? I don't really know.
Hey, doctor, there's a hole in your headlight.
Now get out of here.
We got interested in the film medium. Just one of you were nominated for an Academy Award. Yeah, it's called Timepiece. That was just this past year.
Who can help this man?
The LaChoy Dragon, friend.
Oh, yeah?
You need LaChoy shall be.
Is it easy to fix?
Easy. It's a 6-minute supper.
Here are 2 comedy scenes with the Muppets. I'm quite sure the adults will enjoy them, too. The Muppets. The Muppets, come on.
The 60s had been a time of growth for Jim and the Muppets. Jim had grown his team, finally adding puppeteer Frank Oz and puppet builder Don Saleen, as well as puppeteer Jerry Nelson. Jim's family had grown, with him and Jane now having 4 children, Lisa, Cheryl, Brian, and John. The much larger Muppets, Inc. had moved to New York City, produced a variety of commercials, appeared on nearly every variety and late-night show of the day, and had even produced a few art films. Despite all of the success and even some well-deserved fame, the Muppets had still yet to have their big break. But it was certainly on the horizon. A man named John Stone, who Jim had worked with years previously on a small project, asked Jim to come sit in on some meetings for a show being developed by a new children's entertainment company. Jim agreed to attend the seminar, located at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. After all, it was just right down the street.
This episode of Defunct TV is sponsored by Squarespace.
I should have used Squarespace.
Yes, Cody should have used Squarespace, because with Squarespace's all-in-one website design tool, creating an eye-catching website has never been easier. The good people at Defunct Land even created one to help Cody, using Squarespace's unique gallery of gorgeous templates. And now, Squarespace is offering a free trial and 10% off your first purchase. Just go to squarespace.com/defunctland or click the link in the description to sign up and start designing your website. That's squarespace.com/defunctland.